Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome to episode 95 of the Cloudcast. We're coming to you live from OSCON here in Portland, Oregon, and we're here today with Michael DeHaan, CTO at AnsibleWorks. How you doing, Michael?
Hey, thanks for having me today.
And special drop-in surprise guest, co-host, guest, I don't know what we want to call you, but we've got Mark Hinkle here as well. Mark is returning to the show. How are you doing, Mark?
Good.
So, first of all, Michael, you've got a really interesting background. First off, you're a Raleigh person, and as we discussed before we hit record, all three of us are actually from within about 15 minutes of each other in Raleigh, and we flew all the way to Portland to record this.
Raleigh is a mecca of open source systems management.
It is a small world.
So you, I'm using air quotes here, grew up at Red Hat. And you created Cobbler, first of all. I shouldn't say first of all, but probably before this, or most well known for Cobbler.
I'd say before this, right? So, it was definitely a great opportunity working there to kind of learn open source from like guys that are pretty well known for it and get engaged with a lot of really, really smart admins. And it's kind of where I got into, systems management automation in general, which is what Ansible does.
And you actually, do you have some patents to your name as well?
I have quite a few. There a lot of them are kind of random. So, So cloud might be illegal. If so, I apologize.
So, before we get into Ansible and AnsibleWorks, if people aren't familiar with Cobbler, tell everyone a little bit about Cobbler, what it is, and you're technically not super involved with it anymore, but a little bit of background on that.
Yeah, so I was at Red Hat for almost 5 years and worked on Cobbler pretty much the full time, and we had a kind of interesting mandate there was to build solutions for users of Linux that didn't quite exist, and one of those we kind of identified was there wasn't really a good way to install Linux machines, strangely enough. So there was some basic tools in like system config netboot for setting up a Pixie tree, and there really wasn't that for virtualization and so on. And Cobbler kind of evolved over time because we had a community of a lot of really interested admins, and this was like one of the first major open source kind of pushes for enterprise software at Red Hat. We obviously the distribution was open source, but a lot of the management tooling wasn't for a while. So we built a lot of interesting things over time, and it can help. Basically, it helps you install your machines in your data center and manage your DNS and DHCP and power management, software repositories, and things like that. And it kind of grew over time to manage a lot of interesting machines in a lot of different places. It had some top 500 supercomputers at one point, and a lot of machines in the financial industry. It runs at one point it was running some of the machine or all of the machines underneath Modern Warfare 2 and 3, and that was kind of cool to see. And it's kind of sort of one of those kind of under the radar projects, but very useful for. I kind of like to get systems administrators together and find ways to not reinvent the wheel, and it was kind of one of those things that we can. A lot of people came with ideas like, "Hey, I'm doing power management. How can I make this easier? How can I make package management easier?" And then we can get all of our ideas together and share them. And when you go from job to job, you can just pick up a tool and reuse it.
Gotcha. And so, kind of moving on to Ansible and AnsibleWorks. Ansible came before AnsibleWorks.
It did.
Correct?
So officially as a project, Ansible started probably about a year and a half ago. But it was based on a lot of interest I had at Red Hat when I was working on Funk with Adrian Likens and Seth Vidal. And Seth, he's no longer with us anymore, was a fantastic developer and had a lot of great ideas. And so did Adrian. And we built this kind of way to run commands in an API-based way against lots of machines. And Funk came on over time, and we kind of got involved and got to see a lot of what a lot of people were doing with a lot of the other configuration management tools in this space. But I always wanted to write something that was kind of designed around the need to manage multiple tiers of systems and the kind of the way that IT architectures, in my brain anyway, tend to work, where I'm managing web applications and database tiers, and I might want to talk to them in specific orders. But I also wanted a language that was really, really simple, so that when I manage my automation and I come back 6 months later, I know how it works, and I don't spend all my time writing that. So that's what Ansible tries to be. Is it tries to be a minimal system for managing a lot of different kinds of IT management use cases, from whether that's configuration management, whether that's application deployment, or higher level orchestration. Like how do I do a rolling update across my infrastructure?
So I'll get the first obvious question. And being in the session, it of course came up as well. So why Ansible? Why not Puppet or Chef? Right.
Right. Yeah.
Or SaltStack.
Or SaltStack.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think all of those. They kind of approach it from a programming background to me, like Puppet came around as trying to be a way to improve on CF Engine, and it definitely did improve on it in a lot of ways. But I wanted to step back and kind of revisit it and say, Linux and Unix systems are really just packages and files and so on, and I'm busy, so I'm kind of jaded as an application developer, right? So I really want to write my automation and then go back to writing actual software. Or planning out my IT architecture or my next big business project, right? So Ansible in many ways is kind of a system that I want to get in and get out and be done and keep it really, really simple and really straightforward. But I also wanted to explore a lot of the multi-tier kind of stuff at the same time that I talked about a little bit earlier. And the other thing is this idea that Ansible is an agentless system. So it just uses SSH to manage remote nodes. So I don't have to get any software onto those machines to initially manage them. I don't have to have a working DNS set up, which strangely is actually a really hard problem to get SSL working between two different machines. And how many times have I banged my head against that? And the idea that I can just manage something with what's already on the box, and I know it to be really secure, and when you're not managing it, there's nothing there consuming extra memory, and it's just really, really straightforward to deploy and get going.
Cool. Now, so I attended the session earlier, and I actually took some notes, but I look at my phone to take them. So one of the big things I liked was you use that it's skimmable.
Yeah.
That you can actually, along those same lines, that it's actually written that you can. It's human readable, machine readable, but at the same time, if you're really busy, you can just kind of skim it and kind of go, yeah, I see what's going on.
Yeah,
and I was kind of like sitting back. I'm like, oh. It's really freaking smart. Like that was kind of my light bulb moment in the room of learning all of it and trying to compare tools, right?
Yeah.
And is that something that, again, going back to that, you're just trying to go do other stuff?
It kind of, right? Well, obviously I'm doing it all my time now. So no, I'm enabling other people to do other stuff, hopefully. But yeah, it is. So, I mean, there's a couple things that come up is, if you have a very complicated automation system, you don't really know what happens in your infrastructure, but it also means you're less agile in your infrastructure and you can't respond to change. So when the next business requirement gets out, how do you manage that kind of situation? And I've seen that before, and people are with their in-house scripting or whether they're using something else or whatever. I want to make that as simple as possible to know what's going on. And if that actually means that somebody is something new comes along tomorrow and I want to get off Ansible, that should be great too. I shouldn't have information locked up in the tool that says, I don't know what's going on in my infrastructure anymore.
And sorry, go ahead, Mark.
To that point, what are your thoughts on, you want to know what your infrastructure is doing, but sharing that with other tools, like the idea that you have this infrastructure and there's some kind of attributes to this infrastructure, you want to pass it off to monitoring, I'm monitoring. What's that? Is that language exportable? So I could use a Nagios check or use Graphite or something to take what you've already configured and define how you want it monitored?
Yeah, there's a couple of ways that could work, right? So at the basic level, you could use all the variables that were in Ansible to template things. And Ansible is really good about saying, do this on one host on behalf or about another host, or do this locally with a reference to this host name, and that's how it does all its cool rolling update and monitoring setups. And that's pretty common. So that a lot of those ideas came from a Funk-based project at Red Hat that was currently called To Boot or Poseidon previously. But it was the way that they were orchestrating on top of Funk, and I wanted and had some good ideas there, and then we kind of adapted those into Ansible. So you have those capabilities, but the other thing that you can do is Ansible is really good about pulling from external data sources. And what you can do is, suppose I had some variables defined in, maybe it was Cobbler, maybe it was LDAP, maybe it was OpenStack or Rackspace, or EC2, or we've got modules to pull inventory from like Linode and even like DigitalOcean, which is a newcomer. Getting variables from all of these sources that Ansible can use, but other things can use as well, and make it really, really data driven. So I've kind of taken some steps to try to keep it from being a programming language, because I guess again that kind of comes from me being a sort of jaded software developer. The less code I can write, the better, right?
And so we've had both RPath and Bronto on the show before. And I think it was, I forget which one it was, but I want to say it was Bronto. It was very much the concept of infrastructure as code. And that was probably another kind of theme that I really saw kind of come out today, of that whole treating infrastructure as code. And the Bronto guys in particular, I think, really embrace that. And it seems like very much along this project as well. It's more than just configuration management. It's,
I think
integration, delivery, a little bit of everything.
Yeah,
right?
So I think there's kind of two pieces of the infrastructure as code that are a big takeaway, and I've been trying to kind of refer to this as infrastructure as data, right? Because it really is. It's what are the descriptions of my infrastructure. So the idea that you're using source control to track your automation is super key. That you treat it as a software project, that you continuously integrate. These are all really, really good ideas. In my opinion, the problem with infrastructure as code is software complexity. So what we really want to do is like, hey, so I know that these packages need to be installed. Make that really, really easy to say, here's a list of packages that need to be installed. But you should still, track that in source control and follow a lot of these practices. So we've got some pretty cool examples, like AppDynamics, for instance, has got us wired into Jenkins and Garrett for code review, and they can say, hey, every time I approve a playbook change, roll this out across my infrastructure, and that can be up to every 15 minutes. And they do that without bringing any downtime to any of their infrastructure, because Ansible knows how to talk to your load balancers and your monitoring, and can choreograph those kind of higher level operations, which is something I think that's a little bit unique to us as well. But yeah, the keeping things in source control and knowing who changed what is very important. But I think you do want to step back, and you do want to avoid the complexity that describes your configuration, so that you can understand it and you're more agile with like working with it too.
There's sort of a sort of evolution, like the category, if you will, that you might like pigeonhole Ansible in is maybe a little bit automation, maybe a little bit config management. But I see the traditional category, but I see with some of the people I've talked to that you're touching provisioning, you're touching configuration management, you're doing service automation, and that's sort of, before people were cobbling. They were cobbling together like cobbler, puppet, and funk, and now you're approaching it as infrastructure lifecycle management. And that's interesting to me.
Yeah, so like an example of that is we have a lot of modules for like EC2 management that came from the community, and that's one of my favorite parts about Ansible is seeing all the new modules that people contribute and how those expand over time. And we've kind of rallied everybody around this batteries included approach of this is like our central craftsman toolbox of all our modules, and rather saying, I got to go find somebody's implementation for this. There's my monitoring service probably has an Ansible module, and if not, we'll take one and keep it in there, and everybody kind of curates it and makes it work. But yeah, there's a lot of things, and the lines blur, right? So what is the real difference between configuration management and application deployment? There's really not. The one thing is that the really declarative, structured model is sometimes a little difficult to break out when you need to deploy something that's basically going to be a script installer. So we just go ahead and say, hey, I'll let you write things in order. But the higher level processes in provisioning, I was talking about EC2, is a lot of people have contributed modules for all aspects of EC2, and had a user the other day is like, I kind of think Ansible is a better way to describe some of this stuff than like CloudFormation, because I can read it better. Because CloudFormation is a big ball of JSON. But we have modules for things like EC2 load balancing, and there's new modules in this release now for Route 53 and RDS and things like that. So it's definitely crossing lines. Mostly right now the provisioning integration is related to cloud stuff, but I can see Metal and going on over other things over time.
Cool. And so we're by no means a Floss Weekly. This is a teeny podcast, but you were on Floss Weekly. What was it, last week? A couple weeks ago? When was that?
It might have been last week.
And so one thing I was wondering is the product itself is under GPL license, correct?
So go ahead.
I was going to say, again, it goes back to it started as a project really before it was a product, and before that product led to a company. And it seems like one of the big things I got out of it was out of the session today was an amazing community around it already. And was that intentional, or was that something that just kind of popped up, or how did that mindset?
Yeah,
or were you just kind of you were just kind of bored and you were like, hey, I'm going to start this product, and here we are.
So I owe a lot of my views on open source to folks like Greg DeKoenigsberg. He's at Eucalyptus, and I worked with him at Red Hat. But there was a paper he pointed me to in Harvard Business Review, and it was a pretty cool idea. But it was open source projects that are successful provide a way that somebody can contribute something really easily and see that value very, very easily. So I've kept the code simple in the beginning and forever, really, as best I can, so that it's accessible to a wide variety of contributors. So right now, Ansible is the most popular starred configuration project on GitHub, right? Mm-hmm. Which is really surprising to me, and I'm still kind of trying to understand what that means, right? Because it's a year and a half old, right?
Right.
But I think that's it's kind of been by design, that I wanted to create something that was not just a thing where I had the idea, but more so a community for people to help each other, and that's kind of what Cobbler became over time. And one of the reasons, ironically, Cobbler became that way is it's a few weeks or months into my job at Red Hat, my boss left, and I was kind of dotted lined into a guy that I didn't see very often, and I just decided I'm going to let this IRC channel be my boss, and we kind of just see what happens, and you get surprised every day, and things kind of come out from everywhere. And I think that's really what open source is it's not about I built this code and I'm going to give it away. It's about how can I get people from all these different organizations to share ideas and help each other out.
And I think it goes back to it's a slide I know I've seen of yours, Mark. Your kind of philosophy as well. So
yeah.
I mean, if you don't mind, just kind of your funnel philosophy, right?
Yeah.
Take them through your funnel slide real quick.
Yeah. So, I would like to point out that Greg DeKoenigsberg is a very smart man and also part of the Raleigh-Durham open source brain trust. But I actually had before I go there, but I was really the question I had with the GPL, which is I'm personally sort of lean towards the GPL because I love that mind. If I contribute a module or a playbook to Ansible, what's the social norms of that community? What kind of licensing?
Yeah.
If I'm a individual or a company, or how what terms do I provide that under?
Yeah, so we're pretty straightforward on all that. So everything in Ansible is GPL v3, and I did that just because I think it's a easier way to communicate the license. And we talked a little bit about the company, and we're building some extra things on top that are commercial. But they're going to be free for everybody to try out. That AWX product comes out in a couple weeks. You can sign up on our website to see a webinar when that comes. I hate the word webinar, but it's a webinar. And you can learn about it and all that kind of good stuff. So it's going to give you REST API, role-based access control, a lot of cool stuff. But yeah, so everything in the core is GPL. But if you want to write a module on your own and not contribute it, we don't really consider that linking because we're just transferring the module and running it and so on. And you've got several ways to interact with it if you don't. But the way that it works is you go to github.com/Ansible and you just send me a GitHub pull request. And I'm really happy that GitHub makes this open source thing really, really popular because it's their issue tracker is not very complicated. And sometimes as a maintainer, I'm like, I wish it was more complicated. But it's good because anybody has a really low barrier to entry to opening up an issue or adding some code or an idea. There's also a mailing list in IRC that I'd recommend people join if they're interested. And you can find that on our website.
Great. Cool. I was just going to say real quick that funnel thing.
Yeah. Well,
so,
Actually, that funnel is just the embodiment, my visual embodiment of why open source works. And I sort of talked about that at a talk today. It's basically that when people work in the community, everybody benefits, whether it's someone selling you something or they've contributed collectively, where in a proprietary system you just, even though somebody may not, even though somebody may not contribute or purchase services from Ansible or whatever vendor it is, the users get to benefit from each other.
Yeah, so I think that's a kind of a thing that a lot of people don't get about open source is the best contributions are not always code. They're ideas. Sometimes it's documentation. Sometimes it's just as simple as spelling fixes, right? But sharing with others and helping people introduce new people to new tools and ideas, and that's what contribution is. It's not just about whether you make a commit in the code tree.
Yeah, and I find that the whole idea of sort of this modular development lets people do discrete things like this. It's called collective intelligence. So all these discrete modules where you're encapsulating user context, because that's what makes software good. Like, I work for a software company, and sometimes we have solutions that are looking to solve problems, but user-driven software like Ansible and much of open source, that sysadmin's context on how to configure X is so valuable to you as a software developer, because the process you can nail, but some guy that puts out a Hadoop cluster, that guy knows what he needs to get done, and that helps.
Exactly, and you're starting something up, and you're like, hey, I don't remember how to do this in MySQL, but I see this as a parameter, so I can forget, and I can concentrate on the business problem and getting my app out.
Yeah. So I just think that's the unique thing that makes this generation of systems management tools so much better than the earlier management tools, because they.
Oh yeah, I mean, back in the beginning days, everybody wrote all their own scripts themselves, and and I think part of it is making time for other people to do other things and advance their technology stacks and go learn and go play with some new technology and experiment and maybe fail some along the way, and versus hey, I've just got to get this thing out and I've got to write all this myself and give everybody a little bit of extra time.
And one thing I wanted to also talk about, but that revolution kind of aspect, is from a technical standpoint, and I came up afterwards to introduce myself, but one of the first things that biggest comment was, there's no agent in Ansible. So there's no agent to install on boxes or anything. That seems to be the big thing where everyone's like, really?
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about, was that one of those that was just a big thorn in your side to start? Was that the genesis of how do I design this from the ground up with no agent, or
Yeah, actually, so it was kind of a little bit of that. So I was trying to get my own project working for a previous employer, and I was like, hey, I'm having trouble with this PKI system, cursing under my breath at SSL and NTP and DNS, and that was part of it. But part of it was basically everybody said it couldn't be done. And I was like, I'm going to prove that wrong, because I don't believe it. And if I don't manage to prove it wrong, at least I've tried. And I think we've succeeded in proving it wrong. So everybody kind of thought that management over SSH means I run commands and I parse the results, because that's what everybody did. But it's not. So what we do is we transfer little modules to the remote machines, and they have their arguments baked into them, and they return JSON. But they're programs, they're descriptions of state, and it's just SEP and simple commands and very low numbers of operations. SSH has this really, really awesome thing in it called control persist, where it can keep connections open and do some neat things there. And that allows you to do a lot of neat things. So not only do I get better performance, because I don't have a daemon that might be sucking down hundreds of megabytes of memory, and in a virtualized capacity where I'm running 20 agents on a piece of physical hardware, that's a really big problem. But I also don't have the additional ports open, to nobody's discredit, getting crypto right is very, very hard. So a lot of people have SSL systems that have regular remote execution vulnerabilities. Not to say that SSH is immune, but when it gets fixed, we don't have to handle it.
Right.
And I believe it's one of the most peer-reviewed components out there. But you also get the idea that, when it's not running, it's not consuming any resources. I can instantly install and I can instantly manage things in the field, and I can do it with my OS credentials. So if I have sudo access on a box, maybe that's managed by Kerberos, maybe it's free IPA, maybe I'm using authorized keys in a sudo file that I push out. That's all I need to manage the box, and I can control that because I have to control that anyway. So it's not two levels of control, and I don't have this I don't want to say rootkit, but basically rootkit running on the box to worry about also. It's just I am using this channel that has been here for so long, and it's something you're going to have anyway. And the beauty of SSH is with a lot of cloud systems, every one of these systems can inject authorized keys when they start up, and they're made for that. So you've got cloud init and all those kind of things like that. And it's like a really, really good marriage for cloud provisioning.
Very cool. Yeah, and I just to kind of add to that, I think probably one of the biggest things I saw today was just a KISS philosophy to the entire product or project. That it's one of those, like, I was sitting next to the guy I was sitting next to. I was just kind of looking at each other. It's like, well, this is really simple. Why didn't anyone else? You know what I mean? Like, it's you kind of have one of those moments. You're like, oh wow, okay, that's pretty amazing. Like, why was that not done before?
Yeah.
So, kudos.
Thank you.
Anything else, Mark?
No, I'm fully enlightened.
You're fully enlightened. Nice. So I think we are out of time for this week. So, Michael, where can everyone find out more about the project and what's going on?
All right, absolutely. So best thing to do is to go to AnsibleWorks.com, ANSIBLEWORKS, and you can also go to GitHub.com/Ansible and follow us on GitHub.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And Mark, do you have anything you want to pimp while you're here? Well, you kind of dropped in last second here, so thank you.
I would love for you to manage Apache Cloud Stack, Zen Project, and Zen Server with Ansible.
I would be glad to accept your patches for Cloud Stack modules. So we should talk about that after we sign off.
We definitely will. And if you're listening out there, we would love to see you, the users, submit them too.
Yeah, absolutely.
There you go. Very cool. All right. So, if you like the show, please tell a friend or leave us a review on iTunes. You can follow us on Twitter @thecloudcastnet or on the web @thecloudcast.net, where you can find links to everything Cloudcast. Thanks for listening.